Hello and welcome to Envision. I'm Deanne Conrad, Community Relations Supervisor for the Sioux Falls School District. Dr. Brian Maher is our superintendent, and we are on the heels, I guess you could say, or preparing for President-elect Trump to come on board and take over for his next 4 years. That also means that there's change in cabinet members and such in his leadership realm as well. Secretary of Education, there's been an appointment. Tell us a little bit about how that could impact South Dakota, or generally, is there an association between the Secretary of Education at the national level and what happens here locally?
Certainly, they're a long way from a classroom, but their impact will definitely be felt. Our new Secretary of Education, I've read a lot of things, some good, some not so good, and really at this point, I haven't heard anything from the Secretary herself. So at this point, I want to make sure that I'm not a prisoner of the moment, and I don't get leaning one way or the other based on reports, but rather I want to hear what is it that she has in store, what is her vision for public education. I think that'll be crucial over the next 60 days to hear that and to figure out how we may change in public education across the nation, but in Sioux Falls specifically.
Right. That relationship between the Secretary of Education at the national level and then at our local level as well, as we've seen things in presidential elections and agendas, No Child Left Behind, those types of things, and so we do feel that or work with that at the local level as well. So can you make some of those parallels between how the locals and the national?
You make a great point. Sometimes we think, well, what happens in Washington doesn't impact us here. And I would provide 4 words that suggest otherwise, and those 4 words would be no child left behind. What happens in Washington certainly has an impact on what we do here. So I want to make sure that we don't operate from a position of fear, because that happens so often, particularly the deeper you get into the political realm.
Sure.
I also don't want to stick my head in the sand, but I want to operate from a position of knowledge. So I'm very anxious to hear from the Secretary. I'm very anxious to hear what her strategies are, what her goals are, and I'm hoping that she'll do nothing but strengthen public education, because it's vital to a successful democracy. So I'm anxious to hear from her. I'm cautiously optimistic, but at this point, I just don't know enough to hazard an opinion.
Right, and that's that not knowing. Hopefully, we'll find more direction in the future. But all of those things take time, and we'll hear from her, and then she'll take over, and then there'll be some changes beneath the cabinet level and such, and so it could take a bit before we know the direction of where we're headed.
Right, yeah, and you're exactly right. She'll have a number of people to meet with, to talk with, to interact with, and we'll once that all takes place, I'm sure a vision and a strategy will be conveyed to those of us on the ground, so to speak.
Boots on the ground. Yeah. So what's the relationship between her position and then our local or our state Secretary of Education? Yeah,
really there aren't that many steps. You might think there are a whole lot of layers, and you could probably put a lot of layers in here. But really, it goes to the chief state school officers, and for us, that's Melody Shop. And I deal with Dr. Shop, Secretary Shop, on a regular basis. We have a wonderful relationship with her as a school district, and I am guessing with her new role within the chief state school officers that she'll have the ear of the secretary, and I'm hopeful that she does. Because I think that gives us, if not a seat at the table, maybe we're in the dining room.
Yes.
So we're going to be close. But I think the federal secretary's impact will be felt, and hopefully that'll be conveyed to us by our state Secretary of Education.
Right. More to come on that. It's just something that'll be playing out in the next several months, possibly the next year ahead, as any new change in presidency changes the cabinet as well. And so we'll be monitoring that, watching it closely, and pulling for public education to make sure we have a seat at the table, as you said. Thanks for joining us today on Envision.